Well, good evening, and welcome to Shofar, a celebration of Jewish studies at Purdue. This is presented by Purdue University Press, together with WBAA. It's part of our celebration of 50 years of publishing, starting in 1960. And my name's Charles Watkinson, and I'm the director of the press. So since the 7th century BC, at least, Jews have been referred to as people of the book. And Shofar is, to me, the ultimate example of this, not only in terms of the size of the journal, over 900 pages a year, but also because of the thousands of books that it has reviewed over the years. So today we're here to celebrate Shofar and its contribution to the study of Judaism and the intellectual life of Purdue. From very modest beginnings in 1982, the journal has now grown into the world's, I think, most read scholarly journal for Jewish studies. Last year, we reckon it had about 50,000 readers from almost 100 countries. Wow. Shofar has also formed the core for a wide range of other Jewish studies journals and books published by Purdue University Press. As well as a book series, Shofar Supplements, edited by Zev Garber, we also publish Philip Roth Studies, Studies in American Jewish Literature, The Jewish Role in American Life from the Kasdan Institute in San Diego, and Studies in Jewish Civilization from Creighton University, which is new this year. You'll see a display of some of those publications at the back of the room. And you'll also see just behind you a candy-like array of Shofar issues. And all of those are free for you to take away. So please, as they say in Britain, fill your boots. And please take those away and enjoy browsing them. And if you'd like to subscribe to Shofar, I have to say this, you'll find details in the inside cover of any of those issues. So we're going to begin our panel discussion shortly, but first I'd like to call on Dean Mullins, Jim Mullins, the Dean of Libraries, and my boss, to give some brief words.
Thank you, Charles. It's always hard to follow somebody with a British accent. It makes the Midwestern accent seem so harsh. But you'll have to bear with me. I just wanted to say, and I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to speak at this occasion. One of the first people that I met upon arriving at Purdue 6 years ago was this man to my left, Joseph Haber. Well, he was, I mean, ultimately. But no, he... one of my staff came in and said, there's a professor out here that wants to talk with you. And I said, fine, show him in. And he came in, and I have to say that I've met a lot of people since coming to Purdue. And sometimes I have difficulty remembering exactly who they are, what department they're in, under what occasion I met them. I have no problem remembering Joseph Haber. He made such an impact on me. And as I've gotten to know him over the years, I realize that he's made an impact on many, many people. So I just want to say how much I appreciate being here and having this opportunity to acknowledge Joe and all of the work that's gone into making Shofar. And I want to also comment, I was just sitting here thinking about the fact that if I had pursued what I was intending to do when I graduated as an undergraduate, I probably wouldn't be standing here. I might be sitting in one of your chairs. I was going to go in and study Old Testament Judaic studies. I was accepted at Princeton when I graduated from undergraduate school. And I came from a very practical Iowa family. And I decided my senior year that instead of going to Princeton and studying Old Testament Judaic studies, I would stay at Iowa and get my library degree. And when I announced this to my family, who were coming out for commencement, that I wasn't going to Princeton, that I was going to stay at Iowa, They thought it was wonderful because they could see I could get a job. They weren't too sure about this other thing. But just one other point about that. I took Hebrew, of course, when I was in college, and I was at somewhat of a disadvantage. So many of the kids, or the students in my class, had been to Israel, so they knew modern Hebrew. And they would come to first class, then I wouldn't see them for 2 or 3 weeks. And then they would come back, and just to check in to see how far we had gotten. And here we were struggling, just learning the alphabet. And I thought, this isn't fair. But we finally got back. They knew the script, and we were having to do printing. And so they actually found it more difficult to actually deal with the printing than what I did in trying to learn the language. But I had all of my friends helping me learn the vocabulary, because as many of you probably know, there just aren't many cognates between Hebrew and English. So I can still remember learning the word for to cut. To cut is karat, and I remembered to cut a carrot is how I had to learn these words. So, and that's about all I can say, except for a few other things, and unfortunately some people taught me some very nasty things to say. And I have to be careful when I say things, because I can't remember which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. So, Joe, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate it, and I want to just say one thing about Charles. Charles came to us just last September, and he has turned the press around in a very, very short time. We have been working to bring the press and the libraries much more closely aligned, and we're looking at the synergies that can really help enable each drawing upon the strengths of the other. And Charles has just jumped right into that. And I was just mentioning to Joe just a bit ago that I was reading through an a notice of a meeting, a conference that was to take place in New York in August, I believe, maybe September. And I was reading through all of the list of participants, the panelists, and it was all of the people that I've always seen at all these things, people from Columbia, NYU, Princeton, Harvard. And I was reading through them, and I said, darn it. And then I got to the bottom, Charles Watkinson, Purdue University. And I thought, okay, good, we've made it. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the program tonight.
Thank you, Jim. You can see I'm still in the honeymoon period. Sorry. I'd like to ask Dan Frank to come up to the microphone. Dan, can you? Dan, Director of the Jewish Studies Program.
Thank you. I think Charles said most of what I was going to say. I was going to introduce myself as Director of the Jewish Studies Program. It's a pleasure to be here and to see all of you here today. This really is a celebration of a major component of Purdue Jewish Studies. Purdue Jewish Studies offers a major and a minor, but in addition to the strictly academic side of things, we are awash with extracurricular activities, lectures, and so forth, and sort of bridging extracurricular activities in a strict sense and academic activities in the strict sense is perhaps Shofar, a truly legendary journal, which, as we know, we've learned is now in its 27th year. It has brought great renown to the university and will continue to do so. When I go to conferences and I meet friends, they always ask about Shofar and how it's faring and when their review will appear, because we produce so many book reviews. In any event, I don't want to take any more of your time. There are many more important people than myself here today. So let the celebration begin, if I'm the last person to speak before it does begin.
So yes, so now it just remains for me to have the honor of introducing our panel before handing over to the moderator. On the right-hand side here, you see a person most of you will know, Joe Harborough, the founder and the current book review editor of the journal and director emeritus of the Jewish Studies Program. To his left is Gordon Young, Professor Emeritus of History and and former chair of the Jewish Studies program. And to the left in the middle is Bob Melson, Professor Emeritus of Political Science and former chair of the Jewish Studies program. And to the left, you see Dan Morris, the current co-editor of the journal with Zev Garber. And to the far left, last but by no means least, is Nancy Lean, the current managing editor of the journal. And I'm now going to hand over to Kristen Malavenda from WBAA. Kristen has done a fantastic thing, which is she's come in at the very last moment to replace Mike Lewitzo, who put this program together, with Sally Lutz, sitting there, Director of Development at WBAA. Mike fell ill earlier today, and Kristen has stepped in gallantly indeed at the last minute to moderate this panel.
It wasn't that gallant, but it was a little bit of a surprise, but I'm happy to be here, and WBAA is thrilled to be a part of the 50th anniversary of the Purdue University Press, and pleased to kick it off with this Shofar event here tonight. So let's get underway here, obviously with Joe and the beginnings of Shofar. And for people who don't know or maybe haven't heard your interview, which is on our website right now, let us know a little bit about how Shofar came to be, the beginnings of it.
Well, the person responsible for the beginning of Shofar is sitting right next to Gordon Young, Bob Melson, who approached me about a year after we had started and asked me, would you be willing to do a newsletter for this newly developed program we have? And I said to him, I've done that because the reason he came to me is because I had done a newsletter in political science. So I said, I've done that, let's do something a little bit more ambitious and something that's more than a newsletter and that isn't just a PR kind of thing. And that was okay. We went then to the Dean, Dean Wingle, and asked him to help us financially, because you can't do many things without having some resources at your command. And he, as good dean he was, he said, yes, I'll help you, but I will only give you $200 for 2 issues. So, and I think we went there together. I think you may have been there, and I know Bob Melson was there. And so when I asked him that question, can we raise our own money? He graciously, or whatever, said yes, and that was the key, sort of the big bang of Shofar, because out of that came a lot of things other than Shofar too, because it's obvious that if you raise money and you're going to go around, then you have to do something. You know, you can't just say, give us money. So. And it is also followed that because I had piped up here, I couldn't keep my, that I became sort of the person who pushed on this. I became it wasn't me just alone, of course, but I became the person who went after this, okay? And so that was the first thing. How did it come about? You had to raise money. Well, how do you raise money? I mean, what do you do? So immediately my brain began to work. Well, there were certain things that were already in place. The lectures could be done. We had some lectures. And the second thing is there was a library. As you stated, we are the people of the book. So I took it upon myself to find out. You don't know this, I became the de facto Jewish Studies librarian for a number of years. Practicing without a license, I guess, in this particular case. So I went around and tried to find out what was available at Purdue libraries and what journals, what books, reference books in particular, and then canvassed the faculty to see what they wanted. That was one thing. The other thing was there was in political science I had done a noon series. So it was easy to do, and I noticed that I'll get to in 1 minute. I will get to this. That in the first issue of Shofar, which Bob Melson wrote, called a first year's retrospective, that we had a whole series of colloquium working with the resources we had here, okay, and we had one, I think, outside speaker. So there was already something to report. Okay, so the next question was what to put in here. And if you will hold this for a minute here, I will sort of show. And in those days, this had.
Joe, can I interrupt you? Could we get the microphone a little bit closer?
Okay.
I got it.
Okay, you got it. This
Thank
had. This is the thing that was born. 20 pages, and it had a little article by Bob Melson explaining what we had done that year and asking for support. We had a little article by modern Jewish poets, by Miklos Radnoti, by Laszlo Kovacs, who was one of the early library. We had The Holocaust Must Be Taught, which I think which I shamelessly stole from, I think, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and The Uncertain Success of Isaiah's Prophecy, a Poetical Reading. So they will really have their little articles in place. Now, the other aspect of this that I was concerned about, and I put this in an editorial right at in this issue, is I wanted the vision or the view I had. I wanted Shofar to have some impact. There was no point in not doing something. And Gordon knows this, that we had a very negative reaction to when we approached. I mean, we, not myself. I mean, when I think particularly Gordon and I approached the Jewish Studies Association, that it's a national association, who we found to be enormously indifferent, condescending, and to the interests or to the possible needs, or just to talk to us. And they were located at Harvard, which will tell you enough by itself. And so this really riled me up, because I don't like this. I don't like that. And I recognized, I felt, we were in the position of a new program, and it would be nice to have some people say, can we give you some advice, can we give you some help, and so on and so forth. This was what a national association was supposed to be about. So my view, and I think our view, was let's see whether we can get some momentum going here in the Midwest and make Shofar a vehicle by which people could send in short articles, and we could communicate and get some sense of, in a modest way, some sense of community. And that's what this was about ultimately, and that's what I put into the editorial here, where I pointed out that at that point, incorrectly, that the articles would have to be short, because the other aspect of my doing this is that it's very important. Let me put it this way. One of the significant aspects of Shofar, to me, that demonstrates in Shofar, is the importance of founding acts in every human endeavor. Okay, so the founding act here was this modest piece here, but in it I said we were looking to build something, to get others to write in, and in the earlier stages it was still something of a newsletter. And I'll show you some of these things, because the other day I tried to get I was going to distribute this to you folks. Completely, and had Nancy, I think, send it down to the print shop, and they said, no, you have at least 15 items in here that have copyright problems, you see. So things have changed quite a bit. And there was a whole variety. There were poems. I'll just read this to you, and then the poetic voice. Well, some of you know that I like poems and so on. New books. There were some new books that were listed. Periodical literature, current and current. That meant I had to go to the library and go to current contents in its original non-database form. A lot of work, and try to get some items that I could put in here. There was a news and information that was sort of 2 pages, not only about Jewish studies here, and then there was film and media section, and then the lighter side, which this is where I think some of the problems came in, where I put cartoons that I liked. Well, that had to stop after a while. 2 things had to stop, and then I will stop, because there are other people here. Because the newsletter thing, I made it very clear. this particular item is not going to be a PR to Purdue University. That was absolutely out. Now, we're not just going to say, look how wonderful we are. That was out. So the first 2 or 3 issues, we put it in some stuff, and then we said no, and put out a quarterly newsletter. Because enough thing, once you got money, we did get money from the Jewish Federation, and once resources came in, then we could do many more things. And at that point, we took all the Purdue news and information and made a separate, I forget the title of it, and I would organize it 4 times a year and send that out to people on our mailing lists. I think at this point I should stop because I know you have a lot of questions there.
Well, Bob, I'd say when you had this initial idea for Shofar, you definitely approached the right person. At that point, when he suggested that maybe not a newsletter but something more substantial, did you just kind of hold on and try to keep up with him? How did that go, and what were maybe some of the setbacks or things you had to overcome to get to where you wanted to be?
You can't hold on and keep up with Joe Haber. Are you kidding? Joe Haber is a force of nature. But perhaps, if I may, Joe mentioned that there was this founding moment for Shofar. Give you a little bit of the context of this founding moment. And the context is that there are a number of us, including Joe and others, at the university in the 70s who became more and more interested in what we might call Jewish studies. However, there are 2 people right here who are professionally involved in Jewish studies. First of all, Gordy Young was teaching ancient Israel way before one of us ever thought of Jewish studies. He was the a person of Jewish studies. Professor Mork, who's sitting right there, was teaching German history and beginning to teach. The word wasn't even out there yet, the Holocaust. The word wasn't even being used. You don't realize, many of you, that the term Holocaust is a fairly recent term for the destruction of European Jewry. But Professor Mork was already teaching that, and Professor Larry Axel in the philosophy department was actually the first person to teach a course entitled The Holocaust. And the context of it was that a number of us, including Joe and Gordy and Gordy Young and Gordy Mork and Larry Axel and I and some others, got together and we formed a seminar, a faculty seminar on the Holocaust. And that started in the late 70s, I think 77, 78. And then we weren't quite, we did that for about a year and a half, and then it got to be 1980, and then we were going to disband because there were 10 or 11 of us. We gave papers, we discussed them, and we went home. And then we said, well, a number of people said, well, why not do something more creative? Why not do Jewish studies at Purdue? And that seemed like a big thing. There was no Jewish studies at Purdue. And so Walter Hirsch was very much involved in this. And he was, in fact, the chair of a committee that looked into the possibility of Jewish studies at Purdue. And it's in that context that Shofar was founded. And it is true that one day, Joe and I met in his office, and we were talking about, well, now that we have a Jewish studies program, maybe we should have a newsletter. And I talked to Joe about it because Joe had already edited another newsletter. In fact, I think it was a journal of technology, right?
It was a national newsletter in science, technology, and public policy.
Science, technology, and public policy, and it was very successful. He did a great job. And then Joe started the newsletter, and the rest is history, because what he did then had nothing to do with me. He seized the moment, transformed the newsletter into what is now Shofar, before you, This was about 1982. I went off on sabbatical, I remember, to Israel, came back from Jerusalem, and these two gentlemen had gone out, raised money for Jewish studies. Shofar was off and running. Joe could not be stopped, and he poured his heart and soul into it. It was extraordinary. So we are now, of course, Dan Morris is the new generation of editors, and he's done a wonderful job. And of course, Nancy Lean. None of us would be here without Nancy. But for sure, Joe, we should really celebrate Joe's contribution here.
Well, you're all obviously very passionate about the subject and passionate about Shofar. Bob, you alluded to Gordon's initial involvement. Tell us a little bit more about your initial involvement with Shofar and how it led to the Midwest Jewish Studies Association.
Well, I didn't have that much to do with Shofar, quite frankly. The early days, we were sort of like the 1930 movies where we're going to put on a plane. I've got a barn and you've got this and what. Nobody really knew exactly how we were going. Joe, of course, has the big idea, and basically we followed him. One of the things that Joe and I noticed was that after being rebuffed, basically, by the national organization, we felt kind of helpless and alone. And so the idea was that why don't we set out a survey to schools in the Midwest that have Jewish studies programs, or there may be somebody who is teaching Jewish studies. The history department head comes down and says, we need a course on the Holocaust. You teach a course on the Holocaust. There was quite a bit of that going on in the 70s and 80s. Jewish studies was just beginning to come of age, shall we say, with respect in the academic community. In various departments, there were specialists who worked fine, but at Purdue, there was no cohesion until our groups. By the way, Bob mentioned the one study group that I was a part of, but also in the English department, there were another little cluster of scholars who were working on questions of Holocaust and literature. And the program developed by bringing those two together and getting a lot of people, some of whom were quite cynical about the possibilities. Remember that in 1982, there were precisely one program among predominantly science and agriculture universities in the country. MIT didn't have one. Caltech didn't have one. Nobody in the area that Purdue prides itself mostly as being among the leaders had a Jewish studies program. But we had one at Purdue, damn it. And we were interested in seeing it grow. It took various things, coordinating those of us on campus who taught Jewish studies type courses. Now, I'm not in Jewish studies. I'm a trained ancient historian. I teach the history of the ancient Near East, or I taught back before I retired and became superannuated. I taught a course on ancient Israel simply because I was interested in people understanding that no matter what we think about ancient Israel, it's part of the real history of the ancient Near Eastern world and a fundamental part. But that's not the only thing. So I didn't really know from Jewish studies, but I knew that this was something we could do here, and Joe, our chief nudge, would see to it that we kept our eye on the ball, and we began working toward that route. So we sent out a survey to, I don't know, how many hundred people, a couple, 300 people?
750 letters, I sent them out.
Well, now you can see where Joe was really thinking ahead. Before we're anything, we've got Nancy as our managing editor. And no matter what Joe or I or Bob or Dan have done, the glue that's held this together, when the mediating force, when tempers got a little bit upset, was always Nancy. And we literally couldn't have done this without her. But she said 750?
Yeah.
God, that's more than I thought.
And this was before the whole kind of revolution of the internet and all the rest, word processing. In the early days, this was all done by typing it out, and then we also had another important moment when Dr. Clutch was at
Ben Clutch.
Ben Clutch, who was in the hospital here, saw that we were burning out because we had to depend, who was going to print this. I want to show you this. An important part of all of this also is the temperament of the people involved. In my case, my temperament was sort of go for the jugular, aim high, and rather than aiming low where you're not going to go higher. And so I began at the end of the first year, I think it was about beginning of this volume 2, it was, Shofar was up to 58 pages, so we've doubled it in 1 year. And the following year, this was proving to be a real danger. It could exponentially grow and take over the whole universe, but it didn't. So by the third and fourth, it was still fairly, as you can see, fairly, I don't know whether the word amateurish, but not professional looking. It had to be stapled. There were big problems of getting this done in time, because I also happen to be German background, and punctuality is one of the idols we worship. And if it isn't punctually out, we feel guilty, or we go in, become enraged, and whatever else. So one of the seminal moments, in fact, is Ben Clutch said to us, "Look, you people are going to burn out." This is all on a voluntary basis, okay? And for the people who were involved in the program, the people in the program, the chair would call a meeting twice a semester. We would get together, we would talk about the issues, we would vote as to where we should go. Okay, that was kind of the operational principle of this all along. So it isn't just a celebration here of myself. I want to make this very clear. I think there were other people very seriously involved in this and in developing the Jewish Studies program. So, by the time, by volume 6, this is the last volume in which you see this. It had now gone to about 121 pages. So that is because of my temperament, which was go do more. It's never enough. It's compulsive. This is why we also needed an executive committee to keep me under control, because it would otherwise be a very serious situation. Okay, so that then we had gone down. I went down to the Jewish Federation, which Dr. Clutch had suggested. They had a philanthropic arm
in Indianapolis.
Yeah. And they provided us with money to have a half-time secretary, and then a few years later, and also they provided us, because we had made a big pitch about the importance of books, they actually gave us $5,000 from one of their funds for 10 years. So that was another way of bringing books into the library, because the library, from my point of view, and from our point of view, was an extraordinarily important aspect of Jewish studies. You needed to build up the Jewish studies collection. You needed to do what you could to help. And also, we tried to make the money, what we got, work. So instead of just spending it ourselves, we would go, some of us, go to other departments and say, look, we want the Jerusalem Post. It's going to cost $16,000. How about doing it over 3 years, and then you pitch in, the library will put in $4,000, you will put in $2,000, we'll put in $6,000, whatever it is. So always, all the things that we try to do in Jewish studies, with lecturers too, you try to network and make the money, the resources you got, work as well as you could. And that was that. Then to go back to Nancy Lean, then came the big moment when we got another half-time person. But instead of putting it into another secretary, we decided to make Nancy Lean the managing editor.
Okay.
And we realized immediately that she was an enormously capable, conscientious, talented person, and basically gave over most of the work to her.
Well, let's bring Nancy into the conversation now then. Nancy, you have a very passionate, energetic group to manage here, and as Joe mentioned, you were brought on initially in 1988 as a part-time secretary, but you soon became the full-time managing editor. Explain to me that progression, what you were doing at the beginning and how that evolved into what you're doing today.
Well, I'm still only half-time.
Okay.
And when I came, it was kind of a job to learn all the various parts of the things, because Joe explained it to me by going, oh, yes, we do this, and oh, and over here we do that, and I couldn't see the connection, but I learned the job. At first, I had to type everything. People send in manuscripts, and I typed them all. Luckily, there were computers, but not personal computers, so they had to be printed. I mean, we had a dot matrix printer, but that wasn't going to do, so I had to find a place that had a laser printer back in those days. And so I was really pleased now that we can do everything electronically. People send us manuscripts already in Word or, WordPerfect or something, and I don't have to retype everything, which is good. Basically, the way my job operates is I wear lots of hats. The editors, Dan Morris and Zev Garber, tell me who is going to review the papers that come in, and when we get the answers there, they tell me which papers are going to be printed. And then it's up to me. Joe tells me what books are going to be reviewed and who to send them to, and then it's up to me. So I'm the author liaison, I'm the copy editor, I manage things like punctuation and grammar and house style, which incidentally I set also. And the layout person, I designed the layout, and I actually accomplished the layout using the program that the printer wants. I proofread, at least I do the preliminary proofreading, and then I hand it off to either Dan or Zev. They alternate, and so every issue gets proofread twice. And basically, I make sure that the authors sign all the various copyright assignment forms that they're supposed to sign, and I send camera-ready copy in the form of PDFs to the press on time, in a punctual way, so that Joe doesn't get either guilty or enraged over there.
That, by the way, is one of the strengths of Shofar. Once an article is submitted, you don't have to wait 18 months to 2 years for it to see a publication, as many of us have found out the hard way.
Well,
Shofar comes out on time.
It comes out on time, but that is to say the fall issue comes out in the fall. But we are now scheduling for 2012, so you will have to wait a while to see your article in print because we have a backlog of articles.
Do the articles go online so people can look at them before they're printed?
Not the articles, the book reviews do. The Jewish Studies program at Case Western Reserve University is nice enough to put a website for the Midwest Jewish Studies Association, of which Shofar is the official publication. And they are willing to put online all the book reviews that are waiting to be published. Sometimes it's like an 18-month wait so that they're available. And then once they get published, he takes them off the website so the website doesn't get completely overloaded. But yeah, I will say that, I wear all these hats, and I do hold the journal together.
I understand now why they say that you're the backbone of the operation. Let's bring Dan into the conversation now, too. And Dan, tell me where in the process you came along, what your position is with Shofar, and what it takes to put the publication out 4 times a year.
I think I've been doing the journal for about 10 years, working with Zev, and Zev teaches in Los Angeles. The one thing I did want to bring up, as Nancy was talking about the shift to computers, I think the thing that's really happened, and the new technologies in the web, and the thing that's really happened for the journal since I've been involved with it, was that the journal is now, there's a print version, there's a hard copy, the ones that are over there, but really the vast number of people who use our journal now use it through something called the Project Muse, which is, I think, put together by Johns Hopkins University Press, and it's a fairly prestigious a collective of major journals in a variety of fields. And and probably Joe could tell more about how we made the connection with Project Muse, but I think that's really when the journal really took off to its kind of national and international significance that we've been talking about. This is for people who are looking for an individual article or researching a particular issue, and they go on the Muse, and we have good material. And Joe could probably talk about the number of hits they talk about. It's really extraordinary.
Well, the first thing I would want to point out is that last a couple of weeks ago, I looked at the number of Jewish studies journals that were being used on the Project Muse database as a matter of just a general interest. And there were 9 strictly Jewish studies journals. Out of those 9, this will be over in a big way. Out of those 9, 4 of them are published by university presses in Indiana. 2 of them, now think of this, you have 51 states, you have a very large number of university presses, and in much more prestigious institutions. 4 of them come from Indiana. 2 of them come from Indiana University Press, and 2 of them come from Purdue University Press. I thought that was something that we can really be pleased about, because it shows, again, what you were saying earlier, that in some sense Purdue Jewish Studies is a presence in that sense in Jewish studies. Now, the other thing that occurred is about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I went to the the Midwest Jewish Studies Association, which was then meeting, I think, in Cincinnati at the HU's Hebrew Union College. And I was walking with somebody, and they said to me, I didn't know, from one meeting or maybe going to dinner or something, and he said, Shofar has become the premier journal in Jewish studies. I said, well, music to my ears, of course, but I said to myself, I didn't have the wit to ask him, why did he think this? I said to myself, come on, I mean, you must be joking. I felt a little bit like I've said this before, like Sarah in the Bible when she's told that she's going to have a child at the age of 100. I thought it was good news if it's going to come true. But then I thought about it, and then decided to follow up through and called up the Project Muse people and said, can you give me some information about what the number of about how we're doing? And they were very cooperative. And at the same time, I found out that also EBSCO had a Shofar on it. So we had 2 journals who were doing this. And the reason why this was important, apart from the intrinsic satisfaction of knowing that there was now a much wider audience of readers of Shofar, was that Project Muse in particular was a financial, there was a very strong financial component to it, because the more hits you got, this was a cooperative, it was like a consortium, it was very expensive to become, to subscribe, but you, depending on how many hits you made, you got a return. So that, of course, even impressed me more, because then obviously the issue came up, if we had a contract, by the way, at that point with the University of Nebraska Press. They did a wonderful job in putting it out, but they were not terribly good in following the contract we had set with them in terms of giving us an annual report. So when we approached, when I think Gordon and I, we approached them, and the people who write contracts approached them, and we said, we need to rethink our contract here. They said categorically, no way. We're not going to do this. Take it or leave it. And we only had about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks left. And then I think Gordon and I went to see Tom Bacher. Right. And this is how we end. We had talked to Tom before, and it had always been very well received and very cooperative. And at that point, he agreed that he would take over. So that the figures for Project Muse in particular, which are the ones that bring in some fun, are going up, I believe, each year, and are an important part of our financial situation.
I just wanted to say I really feel the journal is in a very good place in the sense that it's kind of a hybrid. We have the online presence for those who are researching a particular topic, and then we still have the hard copy of the journal. And I think the hard copy still kind of goes back to the original mission of the journal. For example, some people on our editorial board teach at places like Grinnell College in Iowa or Earlham College, and the thought was that there might be just one person at a smaller college in the Midwest or elsewhere who's doing Jewish studies. And I think what we've tried to provide is a kind of eclectic smorgasbord, if you would, of materials. There might be a piece on the Holocaust. There might be a piece on ancient Jewry. There might be a piece on Maimonides. There might be a piece on contemporary film or contemporary poetry, as well as with the book reviews and the book notes that we have, that it could be kind of a one-size-fits-all, one-stop shopping for that individual at a college, who has to know something about everything. And I think we still serve that mission, particularly in the hard copy version. But for those scholars who are looking for first-rate, and I should say our journal is what's called a refereed journal. In other words, when a piece comes into us, we then send it to 2 expert readers who are specialists in the area who really tell us whether this piece is cutting edge or whether it's a legitimate piece within that scholarly community. But then we also ask the reader to think about, is this something that an educated layman could be interested in? So there are so we have a kind of an interesting niche, you might say. I mean, there are very specific scholarly journals about specific areas, and then there are things like Tikkun magazine that some people are familiar with. That's kind of a Jewish studies-oriented, popular magazine that deals with politics and culture. But we kind of fill this niche of high-quality, refereed, scholarly pieces, but that kind of cover a wide range of areas that, again, one doesn't need to be an expert in, and that could serve a faculty member who has to handle kind of all areas. So I really like the place we're in, where we have the Project Muse presence on the web, but we're still, thanks to Purdue University Press, supporting the hard copy version.
And maybe
this is where various of the tracks that individuals within in our group were working on. The idea that Shofar should be one interdisciplinary and should cover as many aspects of Jewish life, period, as we possibly can, and 2, that it be very useful for people who are either alone in Jewish studies, or where Jewish studies is a local rabbi who comes in to give a course, or something like that. And that triggered the Midwest Jewish Studies Association, for which Shofar is our journal, and that contributed to the growth of the Western Jewish Studies Association, for which Shofar is the official journal. So there's a kind of melding of our various interests, and Shofar is, of course, central to it.
Now, I don't know if Bob or Gordon, you could answer this. What's the relationship between Shofar and the Jewish Studies program at Purdue? Are they interdependent? Do they help each other thrive? What is that relationship like here locally?
Should ask the head of the Jewish Studies program, Dan Frank. Yes, it's an integral part of the program. It's just one of the many duties that the head of department has to do. Do you want to talk to that point, Dan?
A little bit, yes. I mean, I certainly think that Shofar is part of the Jewish Studies program. As I mentioned, a little earlier, it plays a role at the interface of both the academic and extracurricular aspects of it. We have a noon lecture series in which we bring local people, for the most part, to talk to the community on a variety of current events or their current research. And I think consistent or consonant with what Gordon was saying and Joe was saying about Shofar is typified by that series. I mean, think of that series as an attempt to reach out to both a scholarly and a non-scholarly audience that has an abiding interest in Judaica. And I think Shofar, at least what I'm hearing, it does the same kind of thing. It's a scholarly journal, but it also attempts to address issues of pedagogical concern and of just general concern for perhaps the non-scholar as well. So it's certainly part of the general mission of the Jewish Studies program. And in fact, I think they're both founded about the same time, right, in the early 80s.
And interdisciplinary is important also.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you a little bit more information just briefly about it. The Jewish Studies program is one of, I think it's 16 or 17 interdisciplinary programs in the College of Liberal Arts. And as I believe Gordon pointed out, I mean, academic Judaica goes back in the States to the 70s, but perhaps really didn't get going until the 80s. So you can see that Shofar and, for example, and also the Jewish Studies program at Purdue is timely. It came on board when things were taking off, and I think we've sort of surfed on the back of that to the position we're in now. You know, Jewish Studies is doing well, and Shofar is doing well, and they work with each other quite
But there are things that I think haven't quite succeeded, as at least I would like to see it. One of them is there was a strong emphasis, and it's still part of the sort of mission, to focus on the teaching of certain aspects of teaching of Jewish studies in the class, in the classroom. And we also decided very early on to have special issues on all kinds of themes that you will find, by the way, in this this article that I wrote for Shofar about the first 25 years. And so that the original idea was to have a special issue on some subject. It could have been, for example, Zionism in the 20th century, or there was some, at the beginning, when the women's studies programs were beginning, I felt it was very important to grasp some of those things and give some people in that area an opportunity to do a special issue on that. And so it didn't quite work out that way, that you had an alternation. The other thing to remember here is that, very important, is that Shofar, at this point, because of the internet, because of the databases, these two databases reach the most obscure places in the universe. There are, I looked at the list of EBSCO in particular, because it is expensive to subscribe. For example, there are last time I looked at it, there were 1,200 institutions of higher learning that had Project Muse, but I think there are a couple of thousand, maybe 4,000 or so, that get EBSCO. If you get EBSCO, you have, and so that you can be in outer Slobovia. And in fact, I have here a list of the 92 countries that where people are accessing Shofar. And as I said earlier, 100,000 people in some way make a hit. 100,000 people. Now, when you think of all the marvels of the printed copy, and I like the printed copy, I like to feel it, I like to, so when it comes out, I like to smell it. But the fact of the matter, folks, is when that version came out, one of the great disappointments in my life was how few people were subscribing. Now, it is all very well for the journal to be a good journal, and I think it was a good journal, a really good journal. As soon as Nancy came, this, by the way, is Nancy, one of Nancy's first issues. You can see the difference here. Well, it's wonderful, but if you think of it, if you have 150 subscribers and 75, and half of them are in the library, and half of them get individual copies, how many people are going to go to the library of those 75 libraries and look at Shofar? And how many people, once they get a copy, are going to look through it and read very much? So even though it's very nice, it was very frustrating. And I asked myself on a good number of occasions, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I'm crazy, you know. But so when you had this new change, one aspect of it is all of a sudden you get 100,000 people. Now, how do these 100,000 people get to this? They get to it not to the old-fashioned way usually. There may be some exceptions here. They don't usually go and rummage through various journals. They go and say, I'm interested in a certain subject. Let's say it's Israeli films. We had a special issue on Israeli films. And then they will type into Google Israeli films. And if you do this with Google on many subjects, one of the first things that will come up is a Project Muse item that says Shofar. And if they go to Project Muse itself, they will find it. So that the reason is that many people approach now and they target particular items they're interested in, whether it's Spinoza or whatever, and they will get Project Muse or EBSCO items that will be of use. That's why you're getting 100,000. That is not to denigrate the printed version. I hope it stays around till the year 3000. But this internet change has made has had enormous consequences, many of them for the good, not all of them by a long shot. And so I'm very happy, of course, that we have project. It took a little while to get project news here to Purdue. I had to nag a little bit, and others had to nag, because it's very expensive. And the bottom line for many of these things, as I've said before many times, is you have to remember that nothing here is cost-free. Somebody is paying for the infrastructure. Somebody is paying for the databases. And there are many, many databases out there that Purdue University would undoubtedly love to have. But unless you have the resources and somebody pays for them, you're not going to get them.
And Bob, we've seen the progression of Shofar from the seedling idea of a newsletter to the worldwide and online presence it is today. Where do you go from here? What's the future of Shofar? Are there things you haven't accomplished with it yet that you would like to?
Yes, I look towards the future and I see a rosy glow. I suppose what I would like to see is not only with Shofar but with Jewish studies in general, is that Jewish studies become, and it is becoming, part of the texture of a university education. When I started off as an undergraduate back 1,000 years ago, and I took my, as we all did, intro to Western civilization. I said, oh good, now we're going to find out something about how the Jews were there at the beginning, how naive I was. You know, there might have been 2 or 3 lines about the Jews. Then we went into Christendom and Islam and so on, and it was just a sideline to Western civilization, to world civilization. But somehow the Jews have soldiered on, and they're still here, and they were there 3,000 years ago. And it seemed to me then, even as an 18-year-old, that there was something wrong, that we're missing something here. And so one of the reasons we started Jewish studies was let's get this right. It's not that we were not being imperialistic. It's not that everything is Jewish studies, but the experience of ancient Jews, medieval Jews, modern Jews these experiences have had an important role in the way we live. So my hope is that not only for Shofar, but for Jewish studies in general, that it'll become part of the wider experience.
We've only got a few minutes left, but go ahead.
Just a little bit specifically, one of the things that we've been able to do with Purdue University Press is have what we call Shofar Supplement Series. And this gets back to the idea that Joe was talking about, the pedagogical or teaching function. These books, which come out of the special issues that we've done, for example, we had one on Mel Gibson's The Passion, which was a controversial movie that came out a few years ago, includes, it's made for classroom use. It has the articles, but then it also includes questions and topics for discussion, and that's been kind of a bestseller. I think it's already into its 2nd or 3rd printing. So we've been moving into kind of specific book publications of key special issues for classroom use. The other thing I personally would really like to see, there's a very strong younger generation, assistant professors and newly minted tenured professors here at Purdue in areas like sociology and history, foreign languages, who are doing work, very creative work in Jewish studies. And in fact, because of some of the fundraising that people like Dan Frank and these gentlemen have done, we've actually been able to hire professors whose specialty is in Jewish studies. And I'd like to see that group get very involved in bringing their energies and knowledge bases and connections and network to Shofar. And the other thing I'd like to see, Shofar is currently with the Midwest and Western Jewish Studies Association. Maybe it's time for us to even think larger, as Joe always says, think for the juggler, and look at seeing if we could connect to even other wider associations. Just one other thing, and Charles has been great about this, is connecting Jewish studies works from Purdue University Press, the list that we're developing, with other regional presses like that have strong areas in Jewish studies like Nebraska, Wayne State, and IU. And I know that some really important collaborative and synergetic kind of initiatives are taking place to really put Purdue in connection with other strong Midwestern presses. So a lot of good stuff is happening.
Well, great. We've got about a minute left, and of course we're here because of the 50th anniversary of Purdue University Press, and with that I'll have Charles come back up and close it up.
Well, thank you very much indeed for this very interesting panel. I just wanted to wave a couple of things at you. This is the article Joe was talking about, the coming of age of a Jewish Studies scholarly journal. There are copies at the back there. Please take one. And just to clarify, Joe mentioned 100,000 users. I mentioned 50,000. What we're looking at is about 90,000 articles downloaded, probably from about 50,000 people. So that's just to clarify. On behalf of Purdue University Press, on behalf of Purdue Libraries, WBAA Radio, the Jewish Studies program, I just wanted to thank you for coming to this celebration of Jewish Studies at Purdue. Thank you to Purdue Marketing and Media for video recording the event. This will be posted online on YouTube soon. To find out more about the 50th anniversary of the press, you can go to WBAA.org and click on the 50th anniversary logo. This is one of a number of events. And I'd like to very lastly, but certainly not leastly, thank our wonderful panelists, Joe Harborough, Gordy Young, Bob Melson, Dan Morris, Nancy Lean, with a guest appearance by Dan Frank. And I would like to encourage you to eat all the food. It has to be eaten. There's coffee, and I'd like you to mingle, take some Shofar copies, and thank you very much for coming this evening.